Good morning. I'm Ezra Glenn, a second-year MBA student and the Vice President of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Anderson Student Association. Presented by the Center for Global Management, it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to UCLA Anderson today for the Robertson Lecture Series on Global Business Leadership. This series is made possible by Mr. Chip Robertson, an alumnus of the fully employed MBA class of 2006, and his family, who have dedicated the series to Mr. Leo M. Harvey, a pioneer industrialist and inventor, founder of Harvey Aluminum, and great-grandfather of Chip Robertson. We're particularly proud to present today's discussion as part of UCLA Anderson's Embracing Diversity Week and UCLA's International Education Week. And I'd like to thank and acknowledge Cindy Fan, Vice Provost for International Studies and Global Engagement at UCLA, who's here with us today. We're thrilled to welcome Mr. Aaron Walton as our special guest, who will join our own Dean Bernardo for what promises to be a fascinating conversation about the value of authenticity in global business. Embracing Diversity at Anderson is an annual tradition that aims to highlight the ways in which this community actively welcomes and celebrates difference, and to spark conversation and reflection around where we've been on issues related to diversity of identity, as well as where we hope to go. This year, the team of students behind Embracing Diversity selected the theme of reimagining possibilities in hopes of inspiring dialogue around questioning the status quo and resetting visions for the future. When it comes to subverting expectations in the world of advertising, few entities come to mind as readily as Walton Isaacson, of which Mr. Walton is co-founder and CEO. Defining itself as the planet's most interesting agency, Walton Isaacson is a powerhouse of the advertising industry, one that prides itself not just on the strength and creativity of its campaigns, but on the diversity of representation and thought it presents within them. The agency's dynamic work includes creative partnerships with brands like Lexus, McDonald's, Jim Beam, Macy's, Marvel, and the LA Dodgers, as well as organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and Bono's One.org. While Walton Isaacson has won numerous awards, including Black Enterprise's Ad Agency of the Year in 2013, Think LA Idea Awards Campaign of the Year 2019, and Multicultural TV Commercial of the Year for one of the first Super Bowl spots ever executive produced by a Black woman, Mr. Walton has many accolades of his own. These include recognition on Ebony Magazine's Power 100 list, as a Pride Legacy Leader by Business Equality Magazine, and as one of 100 people who make advertising great by the American Association of Advertising Agencies. One of few Black CEOs in his industry, Walton is a pioneer whose work is all about redefining global standards of representation and creativity. Joining Mr. Walton in conversation is Dean Bernardo, who has been with UCLA Anderson for over 25 years and assumed the Johnny Anderson Chair in Management this past July. Dean Bernardo has taught over 5,000 Anderson students as a member of our esteemed finance faculty and received 9 teaching awards for his excellence. When he was selected to be dean last spring, Mr. Bernardo cited diversity and inclusion efforts as among his top priorities for the school, both in terms of our student body and the programs offered at this institution. In today's conversation, Dean Bernardo will moderate as Mr. Walton reflects on the importance of leveraging authenticity, inclusion, and diversity to connect with the global audience, and on the personal experiences that have informed his work to that end. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in welcoming Mr. Aaron Walton and Dean Bernardo.
Aaron, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Before we get started with the Q&A, I just want you to know that I'll moderate a discussion, and then there'll be some time at the end for Q&A, and we're going to get questions through Slido. So here's the information you need, and we'll pick some questions at the end before we're done. You've had a remarkable career in marketing. You began, I believe, with Pepsi during the Cola Wars, and you've gone on to found an award-winning agency. Tell us a bit about that path, and also I'm really interested in why you decided to found your own agency.
So I had a kind of an odd kind of journey. I graduated in 1983. I'm an East Coast boy, so I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'll actually tell you, it started way before college, right? So I grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and it was a pretty poor kid growing up. We were, it's my sister, myself, and my mom and dad. We were part of a program called the Metco program. And this is way before forced busing in Massachusetts, and what they did was they had this program where they would take inner city kids and they'd bring them to the suburbs, and they'd have an opportunity to go and experience school outside of the neighborhood. And that kind of, and by the way, it was really funny. A lot of people won't recognize his name, but some of us of a certain age will remember the name. Dr. Benjamin Spock.
Yeah, sure.
He was my host family. And so I didn't know who he was. He just seemed like an older guy to me. And I remember how excited my parents were, like, oh my God, this is going to be our host family. And so the host family was just there to kind of support the students that were there when the parents weren't around. And the school, I went to Lincoln, Massachusetts, and I was there until 4th grade. And it was just an amazing opportunity to experience things that I wouldn't have noticed in my own neighborhood. So education was a very big part of what we were focused on in our house, and my parents at the time hadn't gone to school. They graduated from high school, but not college. And my mom, who is, and I'm giving you a lot of background, and I'll get to your question, but it really helped informed, I think, a lot of the things that made me do the things that I want to do. My mom, amazing woman, started taking classes, one class at a time in college, ultimately graduated from BC, then later went on to get her master's in divinity at Andover Newton, and then became a minister. And so, you have someone like that as your North Star, you kind of get very clearly what is important, and it made a big difference in kind of how I viewed the world and how I wanted to work through the world. My first job, I graduated in 1983 from Babson College, and my first job was working at Pepsi. And it was an exciting time at Pepsi, and I was telling the dean a little bit before, Pepsi came to my college campus to recruit. And I was a student government president, and usually I would get on the recruitment list. But this time I didn't get on because it was a lottery. It was just random. And I desperately wanted to go work for Pepsi and knew what they were doing at the time. They were really starting to look at entertainment marketing as a way to separate them from their core competition, which was Coke. But I didn't make it. So this guy named John Henderson, who was the head of recruitment for Pepsi at the time, I waited for everyone to go in and kind of the people who legitimately got on that list, I waited for them to be done, and I said, hey, I want to drive to New York. I want to interview. I want to be here. And he said, well, come on in. And so I went in, I talked to him for a good hour and a half. This poor guy missed his plane. And I thought, oh my God, that's really the way to start a job. And he actually liked me. We talked a lot of different types of things. And as it turned out, I went to the Office of College Resources, which was the alumni office at the time. And I said, who do we know at Pepsi? I really want to get there. I need an alumni name. And he looked at the guy named Chuck Thompson, who was a VP at the time, looked at me and said, what are you talking about? You've met him. I was like, I haven't met any of the people from Pepsi. And he said, well, you've met Roger Enrico. And I was like, I really don't know Roger Enrico. Now, I was a student government president at the college, and Roger was a trustee, so I would have to go and give reports, and there were, a group of people like this, and you don't get to know everyone. And he said, I'll write Roger a letter. I went down for the interview, and I was breezing through this interview. I mean, I was prepared. I had done an independent study in cognitive complexity and management communication, and I was ready to just sell this to them. And I'm just going through this interview. People are not really asking me tough questions. And I realized they weren't. And by the way, this is for an entry-level analyst job, the lowest level at Pepsi. And Roger was copied on the interview schedule. I'm sure most people at that level don't have Roger Enrico copied on the interview schedule, so people pretty much assumed that I had the job. But I didn't know. I was too naive. I was like, I got to sell myself. I got to get here. Anyways, long story short, I ended up at Pepsi as an analyst. I loved it. There was something about the data and the storytelling that data can share that I really loved. And then they promoted me. I ran the Mountain Dew business for a number of years, and then they promoted me onto the Pepsi business. And by the way, I really loved working at Mountain Dew in a way that I probably didn't like Pepsi as much, because Mountain Dew at the time was the 4th largest selling soft drink. But the name of the building was Pepsi, so most people were focused on the Pepsi business, and they kind of let the Mountain Dew folks do what they were going to do. And it was, it was a teen-focused brand, and we could do all this fun sort of stuff, and no one was really paying attention. We were making tons of money and selling tons of soft drinks. And then they moved me on to Pepsi, which is a blessing and a curse. The good thing is you've got a big brand, you've got big budgets, and I thought, well, we'll try this out for a little while. And I loved it because that's where most of the entertainment initiatives were kind of stemming from. All the music tours, which I kind of led, the Michael Jackson, the David Bowie, Tina Turner, Gloria Estefan. I was the one who kind of brought all those brands, those artists to Pepsi. I tell people I had 3 jobs in my life. I worked at Pepsi. After I left Pepsi, I started my first agency, AWE, which was really focused on celebrity sponsorship, music licensing, marrying brands to entertainment initiatives. And I was doing that with Pepsi for a while, and I was out in LA. They moved me out to LA, and I was like, ugh, I don't want to just be the soft drink guy connecting brands to celebrities. I want to be able to do it with other brands. So I went to Pepsi and I said, let me leave. You'll still be my priority, but I want to be able to go off and work with other companies. And they said, absolutely great. And so the first assignment that I did after that was for AT&T, and I put Whitney Houston and AT&T together for a program called True Voice. And I thought, there's no one whose voice is more pure and beautiful than Whitney Houston at the time. And AT&T was trying to, this is a long answer to a very short question, I'm sorry, I'll get to it. But AT&T was trying to connect their new technology to making the phone sound better, right? So when you pick up a phone, an extension phone, and someone in an office, it sounds like they're right next door. Well, at the time, they were trying to bring that technology to long distance, the long distance service. And so I remember going to the Grammys and seeing Whitney Houston perform. I was like, someone needs to do something with her. I called my friend Dan Clark, who was the VP of marketing. I said, I've got an idea. You've got this campaign. No one knows what it really is all about. It seems like an inside initiative. Let's try to show what your technology can do to make one of the most beautiful voices even better. And so we did that. I started that business. Pepsi went on with me. I collected a great group of clients. I sold that company to Omnicom. For those of you who don't know, Omnicom's a holding company of many advertising agencies. Was there, did my earn-out, and finished, and they had me working in a division that had 40 agencies under me, as opposed to just running my agency. And I looked at that as an opportunity to learn something new and to try, a different skill set that I would need that I didn't have when I was doing my own business. And after a while, I was like, I kind of miss working for myself. And I wrote a business plan. We wrote a business plan, my partner and I at the time, called Creating the Planet's Most Interesting Agency. And we wrote this plan out. And it was still, we were working through the plan. And at this point, I had let Omnicom know I was leaving, and I was kind of going off and going to try something new. And I had a friend who worked at Cadbury Schweppes, a guy named Randy Geyer. And he was in Dallas, and he said, look, we're bringing the beverage division and the confectionery division together as a team, and we want to get someone to kind of talk about the power of one. And the power of one for them was, how do we go to retail with these two different organizations and have more leverage? And it's also the power of one in terms of how do we work better as an organization. And we're looking for someone to be a speaker for it. Someone who can talk about, multiple businesses working together, someone who can talk about the power of teamwork. And I said, oh, what about Magic Johnson? Here's a guy who's a great entrepreneur. At the time, he had, Starbucks and Burger King and Lowe's Theaters. He had a lot of partnerships. And clearly, he was, knew about teamwork, being an Olympiad and NBA All-Star. So picked up the phone, called, and said, would you be interested in doing this? Absolutely. We ended up going to Dallas together. He had a private plane, and I was very eager to go with him on that private plane as opposed to schlep through the LAX. And it was great because he wanted me to brief him on the time. And there were three of us on the plane, Magic, myself, and Kawana Brown, who was his chief operating officer. And Kawana was leaning over. Magic was paying attention. He wasn't paying attention as he was actually reading the paper. And Kawana was talking about doing more of these types of gigs. And I was like, well, I'm getting ready to leave, but I can turn you on to the Washington Speakers Bureau, which Omnicom owns, and they can help Magic get other gigs like this. She said, what are you doing? And I happened to have my plan with me. And I said, oh, well, I'll tell you what I'm doing. Do me a favor. And I pulled out the plan. And by the way, it had markups. It was cross-outs. It was like not pretty. It was just really, really basic. And I said, do me a favor, read this, and just give me feedback. Just rip it apart. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what you think is good. And by the way, the plan started with the types of people we wanted, not necessarily the businesses that we were going to go after. It was really about we want to create an environment. We want to create something where we bring these really interesting people together with different backgrounds, because we knew that if we did that in that industry, which is not doing a lot of that at the time, it would separate us from the rest of the agencies out there. So she read it. She thought it was great. She gave it back to me. I was like, oh, well, that was nice. And then Magic was all of a sudden engaged, turned around and said, what are you guys talking about? And part of me was, do I say something to him? Do I mention it? It's just kind of weird on his plane. I was like, what the hell? He's not going to throw me off the plane. So I said, do me a favor, read this, and tell me what you think. You clearly know what you're doing. And so he read it, and then gave it back to me and said, oh, that's really nice. And the next day he called and said, I've been thinking about that plan, and if you're interested in having another partner, I'd love to be that partner. And that's how we started this agency about 2005. So that was a really long answer to a very short question that no one's ever going to ask me about my life. Right?
It's a great story. I love that you keep your business plan with you wherever you go.
Listen, I was hustling. I was working. I needed to figure it out.
So thank you. And so the title of today's talk is The Value of Authenticity in Global Business. And I've seen consumer surveys that show that authenticity is really important for consumers when they're deciding which brands to support, and that it's particularly important for millennials. So one of the things that is not completely clear to me is exactly what that means. And I was wondering what that means to you and why you think it's important in global business.
Yeah, so great question. So I think authenticity to me is about being genuine, right? It's about being genuine to yourself, to your core values. It starts with self-awareness, I think, and you can't talk about global business without talking about culture, and you can't talk about kind of the differences in culture. And I think from a global business perspective, understanding and celebrating these different cultures can only make the brands that you're working for stronger, bigger, better. And more importantly, it makes the staff that's working for you feel empowered and feel a sense of purpose, which one of my favorite books was Simon Sinek's It Starts With Why. And are you familiar with that? You guys are, yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that book, it really talks about companies that are grounded in, or people that work for the companies have to be grounded in why they exist and why they are doing what they're doing as opposed to what they're doing. And once you understand why it is that you're doing the things you're doing, there's a greater level of success, in part because people feel more included. And I think when you're looking at global business, when you're looking at success in that area, you've got to be kind of focused on what those differences are and celebrating those differences. And celebrating differences is something that we haven't done particularly well in the advertising industry, and it is uncomfortable for a lot of people, I think. We're human. We want to surround ourselves often with people who look and sound and talk like us. But I believe that the real success, the real kind of innovation comes when, I call it, having the courage to collide, where you have these different cultures coming together and sharing the best of what they know and the best of what they do. And it requires a great deal of empathy to be able to do that. But when you do that, and those forces come together, that spark, that's where the innovation comes from. And that's what people are looking for from an advertising agency, or from any company, I suppose, is how do we get more innovative? And the science kind of supports that, right? The science supports the fact that when you surround yourself with people who aren't like you, actually, Scientific American did a whole series of articles, and they ultimately said that the success for true business is when you are kind of surrounding yourself with people who are different than you. And the science behind it is this. If we have a problem, we have a challenge to address, we want to do the best we can to convince you of our point of view, right? So I have a very specific point of view, which is based in my background, which is based in how I kind of grew up in the world, and I will marshal every resource I can to convince you that my point of view is right. You're going to do the same with me. And what ultimately happens is the IQ of the group gets bigger and stronger and brighter. And when that happens, you have a greater chance of identifying opportunities and that innovation that ultimately are going to help solve our clients' problems. So I do believe culture plays a big part of it. I think we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable about things we don't know, and that's just human nature, and got to address it head on. And at our agency, we try to do that. We're very purposeful in diversity. We don't actually even have a head of diversity because it's so part of who we are. It's part of our why, right? So everyone who comes in, the receptionist knows what we're all about, I know what we're all about, and everyone in between. And so we really kind of are very purposeful about bringing those different points of view together because we think it's going to be the way that we win for the clients.
Yeah. I love that expression, courage to collide.
Yeah.
But that requires some pretty adept management skill. And I was wondering, do you have some interesting experiences to share about when it, really worked, or how you get it to work? Because you can see it working both ways, but I agree.
It can be messy.
If it works, it can be incredibly great.
It can be messy, and that's part of what happens, right? We have a lot of strong personalities, a lot of people who believe in things that they just believe in, right? And so we try to put things in place that allow for the communication to be productive, to be respectful, to be positive. One of the things that we do, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kaizen? You're familiar with Kaizen? So for those of you who aren't, it's the Japanese philosophy of constantly improving and making things better. And so a big part of what we do to help mitigate some of those kind of messiness, is to have Kaizen sessions with everything that we do. Even when things are really, really great and we've hit out of the ballpark, we just did this amazing Black Panther program and it did all of this great stuff, but what can we do next time that would make it even better for the client? And so people are really excited about that type of environment where they can kind of come in, bring their true full self to the office every day, know that they're not being judged. By the way, myself included, right? So there is something powerful in knowing that you can come into the office, you can share your successes, you can share your failures, and there's no judgment in that. By the way, we're all going to fail. We do. It's part of what happens. Part of the challenge for leaders is to make sure that we create an environment that supports that failure in terms of learning. And so we're not making it up as we go, but it's never the same. And what we are purposeful in, I think, is making sure that everyone that comes in shares that passion and shares that desire and that curiosity to learn something from someone that they've not learned before. And I think great entrepreneurs, that's what we're really curious people.
Mm-hmm.
We want to go out and discover new things and come up with new solutions for challenges that are out there. And you don't do that by doing the same thing the same way every day.
Yeah. I read an expression, I think, that you use, I think it comes from Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
You want employees who are angelic
troublemakers. So Bayard Rustin, I don't know how many of you guys know Bayard. Bayard is considered to be the lost prophet of the civil rights movement. And he was actually the guy who was an advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's the guy who came up with the idea for the March on Washington, which led to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And he has one of my favorite quotes. He says, "What every community needs is a group of angelic troublemakers." And I love that quote because you know exactly what that means, right? You know how, for me, and in business, we interpret that as being enlightened rebels. So that's how we've kind of taken it at our firm. And it's really about how do we push the envelope? How do we do it in a respectful way? How do we make people kind of get out of their blind spots, which can stifle progress, can stifle the success that ultimately you're looking for a client. He's actually one of the heroes of mine. He was a gay man who was out at a time when it wasn't, it was dangerous to be out, quite frankly. And to his credit, to Dr. Martin Luther King's credit, when a lot of his advisors were saying, you know what, this is not the right look for you. You should probably not have Bayard around. He was like, no, this guy actually, by the way, the other thing that Bayard did was he introduced Dr. Martin Luther King to Gandhi into the ways of passive resistance. So this man played a huge role in all of our lives. And so, I was growing up, I didn't come out until I was in my 20s. And so looking at someone like him and saying, well, he's out and gay or was out and gay, and so why can't I do that? Why can't I be who I am and be celebrated for it?
Okay. So, one of the things that we think is very important for promoting diversity is to sort of give concrete examples that support the value of it. I think we all have, some understanding of how diversity can theoretically, create value for organizations.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can tell us some about successes that you've had in particular campaigns where you really could, clearly
Sure.
see the value of having this diverse group of
Sure.
people working on the
I'll
project.
give you a recent example. How many of you have seen the Black Panther movie, Marvel?
I think everybody.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that movie, talking about diversity, was incredibly insightful in its understanding of Black excellence and celebrating something that we normally don't see. I'll tell you actually a story behind it. So Marvel has a relationship with Audi. And Audi had the rights to most of the Marvel movies from an automotive standpoint. And if you go back and look at some of the old Marvel movies, you'll see Tony Stark driving in a really cool Audi. And so when the Black Panther movie came up, Audi passed on it. And they passed on it because they didn't think they thought it was going to be a niche movie targeting, a young minority audience, a Black audience. We looked at it, and I looked at it and said, are you kidding me? It's steeped in Black culture. It is steeped in Black insights. Some of those insights are very unique to the Black community, but there are some things that connect to the general market. And for a brand like Lexus that is very kind of focused on diversity and celebrates diversity, this to me was a great opportunity to bring a Black-inspired movie to a brand so that they could then kind of expand it out. And it worked beyond our imagination. It's the third biggest gross box office movie of all time. It's the largest solo superhero movie of all time, and it was something that matched up very clearly. There was an authentic connection between what that movie represented, which was, if you remember the movie, it's all about this world. Wakanda was the most technically advanced nation in the world. When we look at the Lexus brand, we look at the technology and how important that is. We looked at the fact that this movie was directed by a black director, a black executive producer, had a lot of people behind the scenes that often don't get an opportunity to be celebrated. Lexus, on the same hand, was celebrating, through us, the opportunity to produce this Super Bowl commercial, which we had a black head of production working on it, which doesn't usually happen in Super Bowl, black account executive working on it. So there were a lot of similarities, and that's an example of really when it worked exceptionally well, where you leaned into diversity, you understood the power of it, you weren't afraid of it, you learned something new from it, and it propelled the brand forward. And there have been times when people have been inauthentic in their, the company that I work with, Pepsi, when they did the Kendall Jenner spot. They appropriated something that was so important and commercialized something that was so important to the black community. They had a black backlash because it didn't seem authentic, it didn't seem real. And so you have to be really very careful about how you use culture to propel your brand. You have to do it in a way that feels real for the brand. It doesn't feel like you're trying to make something up just to sell something. It has to be a part of the DNA of who you are and what you stand for.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about your leadership style.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Roger Enrico earlier.
Yeah.
And at some point early in your career, he said, leadership is having a point of view.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what that's meant to you in your career, how that's sort of how you've interpreted throughout your career.
So when he said that, it was really important because, I know this is probably going to seem strange. I was a really shy kid, and I was out there, but one of the things that he was really good at, when he said leadership means having a point of view, it didn't mean doing it the extent of not listening to other people, right? So he was very, very focused on making sure that there were diverse points of view. People had an opportunity to work in a speak-up environment that could inform what you wanted to do. So for me, at the agency, I love having a variety of different people. One of the guys who works for me is sitting here. And I would tell him that you've got the best job security in the world, because I'm never going to hire another person like you. I don't want another person like you. You're great. I need to get someone else who's going to have a different point of view, that's going to inform and provide me with a different way of looking at things. Ultimately, you have to make a decision. Not everyone's going to be happy. But I love, I think people would say that I probably tap into different parts of the company to get a different perspective before I make a final decision on what it is we want to do. And sometimes that is about what piece of business we're going to go after. Sometimes it's about what we're going to do for a particular client. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with kind of collecting that data and being in a position where you can say, I don't know it all. I want to gather that. I don't look at that as a weakness. I look at that as a strength. Listening to me is it's a hard, not for me personally, but I think people forget. Talk less, listen more often provides you with an answer in a direction in a way that you probably would not have done if you're not kind of sitting back and listening. And it requires a great deal of empathy, which, in our business, people tend not to have. And so I really genuinely think that has been a big part of the success for the agency, and not just me, right? So the heads of the departments each have that same understanding of how it is that we work and why it is that it's important to give everyone a point of view. I'll be honest with you, we were getting ready to launch a new spot, the spot for Lexus. And the idea came from one of the most junior people at the agency. And it came because she felt that she had the support to have a voice. And it's not enough, by the way, just to have people at the table. You have to empower them to be able to speak and to really kind of have the courage to kind of do that. I think diversity programs have failed when they're by the numbers. We need X, we need this, we need this. By the way, we do need to increase the numbers. But it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about getting the people there. It's about now giving them the power and the voice to be able to share why it is that they're there. And too often, I think that hasn't happened. But I think at our agency, if you're not doing that, then you're failing. And those who do succeed are the ones who are doing it.
I'm going to bring it to the audience in just a moment, but I just want to ask you one last question before I do. You're very active in the community. You have numerous charitable endeavors that you're involved with. What are the causes that are really important to you? And tell us a little bit why you think it's important to give back.
Yeah, I think we all have a moral obligation to give back. I think everyone does, not just the agency world. And I tend to look at charities or look at organizations that need the most help. I'm very focused on kids right now and going to schools. I used to complain all the time about the fact that we'd go into a client's office and they didn't understand about diversity, and I thought to myself, well, why am I complaining about it? Why not go and help teach the next generation of leaders why it's important? So I'm spending a lot of time going into colleges and talking to folks like you to kind of get you excited about the power that diversity has to grow a business. Very involved with HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, which really fights for LGBTQ plus work. Very involved with helping people of color get to school and get college education, which I was a tremendous beneficiary of. So those are kind of the things that I'm really focused on right now. And the agency, we have a program at the agency where we all kind of come together. We're just at the process now of making the decision. We have the account directors at the agency kind of pitching us, like which charities, which organizations they want the agency resources to be targeted to. And then as a group, we will all we have an office in New York, Chicago, Dallas, and here in Culver City. And so as a group, we're all going to come together and work on those. So we're making that decision next week.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks so much. So
Sorry
we're
I
going
talked so long, that was a lot.
Yeah, we're going to take some questions now. Okay, so here's a question. You mentioned the marriage of data and storytelling with respect to Pepsi. With the increased focus on data and analytics in the past decade, how do we maintain balance?
Here's what I will tell you. When we're looking at data at the agency, a big part of that is helping to understand what the target is, where the target is, who we're specifically trying to reach, and how they're receiving information. That can't overshadow, so that's the science part, right? So we're constantly looking for new, efficient ways to get closer to the consumer and to get information that is going to allow the brands to touch the lives of these consumers. That's the science. The art part is making sure that there's beauty in how we do that. And there's beauty in the storytelling, there's beauty in the art direction. And we can't let the science part overshadow the beauty of the storytelling, because the storytelling, the art of that is the part that makes it relevant for us, that touches the heart. And when you touch the heart, that's when you remember the things the most, and that's when you have that connection. So the science gets us to the spot, and the art helps us kind of round out that story and make it real and relevant for the consumers.
Great. You touched on this a little bit, but I'm interested to hear more. So the question is, what is most critical for companies right now? Diversity, being invited in, equity, inviting your voice, or inclusion, comfort sharing your voice?
I don't know that one is, so give me to diversity.
So being invited in,
Yeah.
diversity, equity, inviting your voice, or inclusion, having the comfort to share your voice.
I don't know that you can separate any of it, quite frankly. I think inviting someone to the party but not letting them, dance is kind of horrible.
Yeah.
Like what? So don't invite me if you're not going to let me dance. And so I think you can't separate, and that's, I think, where a lot of companies have failed. They've done the inviting, but then they've said, okay, we're done. That's not where it ends. That's where it begins, folks. That's where it just starts. And so part of what you have to also do is once you invite them in, you have to now help them stay in. And you help them stay in by actually helping the organization understand that there's a new way of doing business. There's a new way of kind of receiving information. And we're obligated, when we make a commitment to you, Dean, to come and work with us, I'm obligated to do everything I can to make you successful. And that means me understanding what it is that you want to get out of it and how is it that, as a leader, I can help you achieve that goal. I think some of the best moments in my career have not been about campaigns or have been about, building things. It's been about watching someone that you've invited into your environment. Sometimes they're struggling. Maybe you see it as a professor, where the student is struggling, and all of a sudden, boom, they get it. They figured it out. And for me, those moments where you're bringing in an employee or a staff member, and they're like, and then that light goes off, and they get it. You're like, okay, I did my job. Now I don't have to worry about doing that person's job. I can go on and work on something else. So I think I don't think you can separate any of them. I think they're all equally important. And I think you got to have the courage to go out and be that change agent in your organization, in part because it's going to help the organization be more profitable.
So here's a question. How do you manage a situation where your value of authenticity doesn't necessarily align with your client's core values or brand?
That's a great question. I'll tell you, we've had, you have a couple of options, right? So one option is, and now before we go out to approach a particular client, we look at their core values and make sure that they do align. Because we're giving blood and sweat and we want them to succeed. You have to be able to say no and have the power to say no. There was a electronic cigarette manufacturer that came to us and offered us a ton of money. And it was not part of who we were for a number of reasons. And we said, we're gonna pass. We're gonna take a flyer on it. So part of it is just having the strength to know when to walk away. I tell folks all the time, now in a cultural sense, I will tell you that some of the challenges we had early on, it's not where it needs to be, it's getting better. Talking to clients about doing work for the LGBTQ community. A lot of clients, older clients, were just uncomfortable with it. And I didn't look at that, I looked at it in a negative way in the sense that, gosh, I want them to understand the power of this. But I also understood that they've grown up a certain way for a long time. And so part of my being empathetic is, okay, putting myself in their shoes, how do I now show them a different way of looking at the world? Part of it is going to be data-driven, which I'm showing them. The other part is going to be human-driven. And so you just find that balance. I don't know that there's one particular formula for it. I just know you got to keep trying. You don't stop because there's no way to get to the finish line if you stop.
Great. So what advice do you have for students of color that want to push for change in spaces that have historically excluded people of color, like business, perhaps your own? field?
My advice first of all, is never let anyone make you feel less than. There is incredible value that you have as a person of color, as a person who's diverse, that the companies that you need or the companies that you want to be at desperately need you to be who you are. Bring your true self to the office, do your homework, understand whether or not that environment's going to be there. By the way, I tend to like to run into the fire where those places that don't want it, because I'm like, I'm going to teach them how to do this. I know I'm going to get them, I'm going to turn them around, and there's a challenge in that. My advice is to not compromise, to understand that you are exceptionally valuable. My advice is to go in there knowing that there's going to be things that you're going to fail at. It's part of what we do. It's part of where we learn from. And you just got to keep going at it. It's not fair. Unfortunately, life is not fair sometimes. It's just the cards we're dealt with. But there's always some advocates in the building that want to champion what you're doing. A lot of companies now have employee resource groups that have become internal champions to help those groups, those minority groups, kind of succeed in that environment. But that's kind of what I do. I mean, I don't know. I mean, everyone's a little bit different, right? Part of it is how you approach it. Not everything is racist. Not everything is always. I mean, it's easy to kind of get to that point. But I would say you can't stop. You just have to continue to go and bring data, which is what I do. When people were saying, we're not so sure we should be targeting Hispanic consumers, I was like, folks, Hispanic consumers are growing at this rate. If you want to be around tomorrow, you better start figuring out how to talk to them today, because they're going to figure out those brands that have talked to them and that are being real with them. And in order to do that, we need to have that level of expertise in the building, and we need those kind of folks here to help educate us, including myself. By the way, one thing I will say, you also have to deal with privilege, right? So in my world, when I looked at, it's not just about, it's helping other people understand the impact of privilege and the negative part of privilege. And I had to check myself, actually, and think, well, you know what? In the LGBTQ community, I'm a black gay man, but black trans women in our community are having a really hard time. And in that realm, I have privilege. So I have to kind of look at myself and say, wait a minute, there are things that I have to be much more aware of to help other people and create that environment. I know I went off topic a little bit, but I'm sorry. It happens.
I think we have time for one last question.
This went by fast.
Yeah, well, I
just
don't know
talk
about
too
you,
much.
but I could listen to you all day. But we do only have time for one last question. You said something really interesting when you were founding Walton Isaacson. You were thinking about the kinds of people you wanted to bring in, more so than the clients and so on. So here's a variation on that. The question is, students in job search will typically target companies or industries. Rarely will they target a particular person they want to work for. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Here's what I would tell you. You know, we had a little bit of the field of dreams philosophy. If you build it, they will come. And part of for what we wanted to do, and I agree, by the way, most people will tell you their experience at a company is really based on the person they work for. I don't know how you, beyond talking to friends or people that you might know at a particular place, what it's like to work for Aaron. They might say, oh my God, he's crazy, stay away, go run in the other direction. I would say do your research on the culture as much as do your research on the products that they're selling. Because at the end of the day, the most valuable assets for us, for any company, is the employees. I really believe we usually get it wrong. People usually, you got to make the client happy. It's like, no, you got to make the employees happy. If you get the employees happy and they're feeling rewarded and they're feeling like they're learning and that they're contributing, the work is going to end up being better. And you also have to be open to the fact that you should be willing to work for difficult people and not difficult people. It's the way of the world. I mean, we're not going to go through this Pollyanna world where everyone's just nice and lovely. Part of the skills that we have to develop are how do we deal with people who aren't really nice? And how do we kind of get things move forward in an environment that is not necessarily particularly, that is hostile to the way that we believe or what I feel. And so I look at those kind of opportunities not as a negative, I look at it as an opportunity to learn something new. And I think going out, if it's your first job, just be open to the fact that it's not going to be your last job. It's going to be, one in many opportunities for you to learn and to grow. And you could also go online, and I'm sure you can read comments about how people feel about the companies that they work at, and so there are a lot of different resources to do.
Well, thank you so much. I really
God,
appreciate your
great.
time. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
you.
You guys are great.